I taught biology for over 30 years. I could explain how the human heart worked in my sleep. But that morning in February, I couldn't even trust my legs to hold me up. That was the first thing Raymond Carter told me when I visited him last spring. At 74, Raymond had retired just 3 years earlier. He was the kind of man who used to bike 5 miles to school even in the rain. He loved his garden, his books, and waking up early to make breakfast for his wife. But after retiring, his days slowly shifted. Less walking, more sitting, quick meals instead of real food, and the nights. Restless, often filled with news on a glowing screen that kept him up past midnight. It all seemed harmless until that one morning. He was reaching for the coffee pot. His vision blurred, his knees buckled. In a second he was on the floor, alone, breathless and scared. "I didn't slip," he said. "My body just gave up." Raymond didn't have a major illness. No stroke, no heart attack. But what brought him to the ground wasn't one big thing. It was a collection of small habits that quietly wore his body down over time. And sadly, that story isn't rare. In fact, millions of people over 60 are unknowingly making the same mistakes every day. That's why this video matters. Today, we'll walk through the 9 silent habits that slowly drained Raymond's strength, and how he turned things around in just 90 days. If you stay with me until the end, you'll not only learn what those habits are, but also discover simple, powerful ways to protect your own energy, balance, and independence, starting as early as tomorrow morning. So, what exactly were those 9 habits? And which one do you need to break before it's too late? Let's begin with the first. Did you know sitting for 8 hours a day can harm your body just as much as smoking a pack of cigarettes? That line caught Raymond's attention when he read it in a magazine at his local clinic. At first he laughed. He wasn't a smoker, never had been, but sitting, that had become a quiet part of his routine. Since retiring, Raymond would often spend 4 to 5 hours a day in his reading chair, lost in his old textbooks, local news, and crossword puzzles. The sun would rise and fall through the living room window, and sometimes he'd realize he hadn't stood up once since breakfast. But his body noticed. His hips began to ache, his lower back tightened. Walking to the mailbox felt like climbing a hill, and more concerning than anything, his thoughts started to feel slower. He'd forget why he walked into the kitchen, or take an extra second to find the right word mid-conversation. That's when his doctor explained the term sitting disease. According to Mayo Clinic, prolonged sitting can reduce blood circulation, weaken the muscles in your hips and legs, and increase your risk of cognitive decline by up to 30%. 30%, not because of a stroke, not because of aging, but because of stillness. The kind of stillness that slowly disconnects your brain from your body without making a sound. Raymond didn't need a fancy gym or a strict fitness routine. What changed his life were 2-minute habits. Every 30 minutes, he'd set a gentle alarm on his phone to remind himself to get up. Sometimes he walked to the kitchen and back. Other times he'd stretch, swing his arms, or simply stand and breathe by the window. It wasn't much, but it worked. Within 2 weeks, the stiffness faded. Within a month, his thinking became clearer. And he started feeling like himself again. If you're watching this and spend hours sitting each day, remember this. Motion is medicine. You don't need to run a marathon. You just need to stand up and give your body a little nudge every now and then. But what happens when the very first thing you do in the morning is skip breakfast? That's exactly what Raymond used to do, and it nearly cost him more than just energy. Skipping breakfast doesn't just make you tired. It quietly scrambles your blood sugar and chips away at your memory. Before his fall, Raymond's morning routine was always the same. He'd brew a strong cup of black coffee, grab a sweet pastry or a leftover donut from the night before, and sit by the window to read the paper. No eggs, no fiber, no real fuel. I wasn't hungry, he told me, and coffee felt enough. But what felt like a small choice turned into a silent enemy. On mornings like that, Raymond often felt alert at first, thanks to the caffeine rush. But by 10 a.m., his hands would tremble slightly. His thoughts moved slower. Sometimes he'd forget if he fed the cat. By noon, he was starving and craving anything salty or sweet. He didn't know then that skipping breakfast was causing his insulin to spike and crash like a roller coaster. His blood sugar would drop sharply after the caffeine wore off, leaving his brain foggy and his body fatigued. According to researchers at Johns Hopkins, older adults who consistently skip breakfast may experience a higher risk of glucose instability and cognitive decline over time. After that morning on the kitchen floor, Raymond made a quiet promise to his wife and to himself. No more skipping, no more sugar-first starts. These days, his breakfast is humble but healing. One boiled egg, a bowl of warm oats with a sprinkle of cinnamon, a few slices of fresh ginger in hot water. It's not fancy, but it's steady. And it helps steady everything else: his blood sugar, his memory, even his moods. If breakfast has become just a cup of coffee for you, consider this your sign. Your body deserves more. Not much. Just enough to wake up your cells, feed your mind, and carry you through the day with strength. Of course, even with the right breakfast, there's one thing many seniors forget to include in their day until it's too late. And that's water. You wait until you feel thirsty to drink water. That's the first sign your brain may already be in trouble. Raymond used to rub his temples every afternoon, a dull, nagging headache. He blamed it on his reading glasses, sometimes on the weather. But not once did he consider water. After all, he wasn't sweating. He wasn't doing much, just reading, relaxing, maybe walking a bit. I didn't feel thirsty, he said, so I figured I was fine. But he wasn't fine. As we age, our brain's thirst signals fade. After 65, it's common to lose the ability to sense dehydration early. That means by the time we feel thirsty, our body's already behind. And when we're mildly dehydrated, something subtle but serious happens. Blood flow to the brain slows, memory slips, focus blurs. In Raymond's case, those headaches weren't eye strain. They were his brain quietly asking for water. Studies from the University of Connecticut show that even 15% fluid loss can reduce mental alertness and cause fatigue in older adults. Just 15%. That's less than a single glass of water missing from your day. After learning this, Raymond made one small change. He placed a clear bottle of warm water beside his reading chair. Every 30 minutes, he took a slow sip, even if he didn't feel the need. It became part of his rhythm, like turning a page or adjusting his glasses. The headaches faded. His thinking felt sharper, and the simple act of drinking became a quiet gift to his body and mind. If you've been waiting for thirst to tell you what to do, it's time to flip that script. Let your intention lead your hydration, not your symptoms. But even with good hydration, there's another hidden danger lurking in many kitchens, and it's often dressed in comfort and flavor. Let's talk about what's really hiding inside our favorite snacks. Low-fat snacks, whole grain crackers, may actually harm your liver and gut after age 60. For years, Raymond thought he was making smart choices. Every evening around 8 p.m., he'd settle in with a cup of chamomile tea and a small plate of what the label called healthy oat biscuits. They were low in sugar, high in fiber, and marketed towards seniors. It felt like the perfect treat, harmless, controlled, comfortable. But after a few months, something felt off. His digestion slowed. His belly felt heavy after meals. He had more bloating than usual, and sometimes he skipped breakfast the next morning just to feel normal again. His wife gently asked if he was sure those cookies were doing him any good. Turns out they were. Even snacks labeled low-fat or whole grain can hide something dangerous: preservatives, artificial emulsifiers, and industrial seed oils. These ingredients don't scream trouble right away. But inside the body, they can quietly spark chronic inflammation, particularly in the liver and the lining of the gut. After 60, our bodies process these chemicals less efficiently. The result? Silent damage. A recent study from the Journal of Nutrition found that consistent intake of ultra-processed foods increases inflammatory markers by 25% in adults over 65. Raymond didn't have to give up his evening ritual. He just had to replace it. Now, instead of factory-made snacks, he keeps a small jar of roasted almonds on the table. Sometimes a few dried apricots or apple slices with a pinch of cinnamon. Nothing fancy. Just food his body recognizes. Within weeks, the bloating eased. His energy in the morning returned. And best of all, he stopped feeling sluggish before bed. So if you're still trusting that healthy-looking package in your pantry, take a closer look. What's written in small print might be writing a bigger story inside your body. But while food choices can shape our days, the night holds its own kind of danger, especially if sleep becomes an afterthought. Let's take a closer look at what happens when rest is no longer truly restful. You go to bed at 11 p.m. after 60. That habit may quietly raise your risk of mental decline. For Raymond, the quiet of late night felt comforting. After dinner, when the house had settled and the clock passed 9, he'd turn on the news. One channel led to another, sometimes a documentary, sometimes scrolling headlines on his phone. He didn't think much of it. It was just a way to unwind. He usually turned off the screen by 11, sometimes closer to midnight. But his morning started to feel different. He woke up groggy, a little dizzy. The sunlight felt too sharp. He'd forget small details like where he placed his glasses or what day of the week it was. He brushed it off at first. Just getting older, he thought. But something didn't sit right. The truth came during a routine checkup when his doctor asked about sleep, not just how much, but how and when. That's when Raymond learned what blue light was doing to his brain. Screens, from phones to TVs to tablets, emit blue spectrum light. That light suppresses melatonin, the hormone that signals our body it's time to rest. After 60, melatonin production is already lower. So when blue light floods the eyes before bed, sleep becomes shallow, delayed, and disorganized. According to a study from the National Institutes of Health, disrupted melatonin cycles in older adults can increase the risk of mood disorders, memory loss, and even early signs of dementia by up to 23%. That hit Raymond hard. The very habit that helped him relax was stealing the rest his brain needed to repair itself. So he made a small shift. No screens after 9. He started dimming the lights, sipping warm ginger tea, sometimes journaling or reading poetry instead. Within days, his sleep deepened. Within weeks, the morning fog lifted. He woke up clearer, lighter, more present. If your nights end with glowing screens, your brain may be paying a quiet price. Sleep isn't just rest, it's restoration. And without it, everything else begins to unravel. But even if you sleep well, there's something just as crucial that most people forget to do after waking up. It only takes 2 minutes, but it might prevent the next fall. Let's talk about that next. A simple 2-minute stretch in the morning can reduce your risk of falling after 60 by up to 60%. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when it happened. Raymond had just opened his eyes. The sun was peeking through the blinds. He swung his legs over the bed like he'd done every morning for decades. But this time, something felt off. His left foot wobbled. His knees didn't respond right away. And for a moment, he stumbled, catching himself on the nightstand. No injury, no fall, but a silent warning. He hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't sick. He wasn't weak. But what he didn't know was this. After 60, our muscles and joints stiffen overnight. It's not just about age. It's about blood flow, joint fluid, and nerve signals needing time to wake up. Just like a cold car on a winter morning, the body needs warming up before it moves. After that scare, Raymond added one simple habit. Before standing, he sat at the edge of his bed. He pointed and flexed his feet, rolled his ankles in slow circles. He reached up with both arms, stretching toward the ceiling, letting his spine loosen and his shoulders expand. It took less than 2 minutes, but the impact was lasting. According to a study published in the Journal of Geriatric Physical Therapy, Morning stretching routines in older adults can improve balance and mobility by 32% and reduce fall-related incidents by over 60% within 3 months. For Raymond, those 2 minutes gave him more than safety. They gave him confidence. He no longer feared the first step of the day, and that sense of control, of intention, made all the difference. If your feet hit the ground before your body is truly ready, you're taking a risk that doesn't need to exist. Start your mornings with kindness for your muscles, your bones, and your future. Now, speaking of prevention, there's one mistake even healthy seniors make simply because they feel fine. And that mistake could cost them the chance to catch illness before it starts. Let's take a look. A woman in New Jersey felt perfectly fine until a routine test revealed late-stage cancer. Why? Because she hadn't seen a doctor in 4 years. Raymond used to think he didn't need checkups either. For nearly 2 years, he skipped appointments. He felt all right, had no chest pain, no dizziness, no visible symptoms. "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," he'd say with a little laugh. But deep down, part of him didn't want to know. Like many others his age, he feared opening a door he couldn't close. Then a friend from his book club passed unexpectedly. Heart failure, undiagnosed. Raymond sat in his living room that evening, silent, wondering what might be happening in his own body that he couldn't feel. The next morning, he scheduled a full checkup. The results: his blood pressure was higher than it should have been. His LDL cholesterol was edging into dangerous territory, and a basic eye test revealed early-stage macular changes he hadn't noticed. Nothing dramatic, but real, and more importantly, still reversible. Feeling normal doesn't mean you are healthy. Many of the most serious conditions in older adults develop quietly: high blood pressure, glaucoma, atrial fibrillation, colon polyps. These issues don't knock on the door. They slip in silently day by day. That's why Raymond now keeps it simple. Every 6 months, like clockwork, he gets a routine check: blood pressure, lipid profile, blood sugar, heart rhythm, and an eye exam. He even writes it on his calendar like an oil change. Not as a chore, but as a gift to himself and to the people who love him. According to the CDC, consistent health screenings after 65 can reduce preventable complications by over 40%. And the earlier something is caught, the simpler the treatment becomes. If it's been more than a year since your last checkup, maybe it's time. Not because anything feels wrong, but because you matter enough to know for sure. And yet, even when your body is monitored, your labs are stable, and your diet is solid, there's one invisible habit that can quietly sabotage your health from within. It lives in the way you think, and in the story you tell yourself each morning. Let's explore that next.